Good evening. Welcome to this special programme on the most significant day in British politics for more than a decade. Tonight, Britain has a new leader.
I will try my utmost. This is my promise to all of the people of Britain. And now let the work of change begin.
Yes, Gordon Brown is the country's 52nd Prime Minister, promising a new style of politics. Already tonight there have been changes in the Cabinet. Patricia Hewitt has resigned as Health Secretary, and there are indications of much more. And of course it's farewell from him. Tony Blair resigns as PM and MP to a rousing common send-off.
Au revoir, auf Wiedersehen and arrivederci.
Tonight we'll be exploring all the implications of Gordon Brown's takeover. And over the next hour, I'll be examining a seminal day in Westminster, joined by some of Gordon Brown's closest allies and biggest political foes, assessing what it all means and what the future holds for Britain. First, the country changed today, and for no one more than the man who's waited at least 10 years to become Prime Minister. At long last, Prime Minister Gordon Brown. With his wife Sarah by his side, Mr. Brown promised changes ahead with a new style of leadership.
This will be a new government with new priorities. And I have been privileged to have been granted the great opportunity to serve my country. And at all times, I will be strong in purpose, steadfast in will, resolute in action, in the service of what matters to the British people, meeting the concerns and aspirations of our whole country.
He spoke of that need for change and pledged to continue to listen and learn from the British people.
I will reach out beyond narrow party interest. I will build a government that uses all the talents. I will invite men and women of goodwill to contribute their energies in a new spirit of public service to make our nation what it can be. And I am convinced that there is no weakness in Britain today that cannot be overcome by the strength of the British people. On this day, I remember words that have stayed with me since my childhood and which matter a great deal to me today. My school motto, I will try my utmost. This is my promise to all of the people of Britain. And now let the work of change begin. Thank you.
Just hours earlier, Tony Blair was moving out and moving on. After a decade in Downing Street, it came out by the chestful, personal and political baggage. At his final appearance at PMQs, Iraq dominated, but there were lighter moments as he dealt with questions on Europe.
As for his, I'm afraid we can't agree on the treaty, but as for his good wishes to me, may I say to him, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen and arrivederci.
On employment, or rather the lack of it.
Surname Blair, first name T. This form is important to you. Take good care of it, P45.
And with the Prime Minister's post now vacant, Gordon Brown left the Treasury to accept an invitation from the Queen to form a new government. After 55 minutes, Gordon Brown emerged, Britain's new Prime Minister. For the Blairs, the start of their new life was a humble affair. Standing down as an MP and accepting a role as a Middle East envoy, the couple travelled to his former constituency. When they arrived, there was no official car, none of the comforts of ministerial office. Well, Gordon Brown's now got to prepare for his first night in number 10 as Prime Minister. At the moment, when last heard of, he was working in his Commons office, putting together the team that he says will carry through his promise of a new style of politics. Well, with me for the next hour are three people who, in different ways, know the new Prime Minister better than most. Kenneth Clarke, as Chancellor, was shadowed by Gordon Brown for a number of years. Charles Kennedy, of course, led the Liberal Democrats in opposition against the Labour government's most controversial policy, the Iraq War. And the former Labour MP, Una King, has for the last few weeks been travelling the country almost as a warm-up man, or a woman, I should say, to the new Prime Minister. Kenneth Clarke, we started at the beginning by saying that this was probably the most momentous day in British politics for a decade. Do you think it is, the change from Tony to Gordon?
It's an historic day. I must admit, I've had difficulty all day in getting into the party atmosphere. I mean, across the House of Commons, school is overexcited, is the general mood all over the place. And I had various things to do, and every now and again it accidentally passed me by. But it's a transition. It's a slightly strange, theatrical one. I mean, I'm glad it's come, because I think the last 7 weeks have been farcical. And I don't think the Prime Minister should change hands like this, with this kind of personal handover from one president to another and all the rest of it. But I do regret that I didn't participate more.
All right.
I like
that's
these
a chance.
historic occasions,
look.
and change of Prime Ministers makes a change.
We'll look forward to the next minute. How significant do you think it all is, Charles Kennedy?
Oh, it's very... I mean, there's no doubt it's significance. I mean, that's for sure. I kind of felt yesterday, as opposed to today, that... you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger showing up in town kind of gave the Hollywood impact to all of this that was probably correct in terms of Blair and the way in which the Blairs have done this. It has been very charismatic, very presidential, all the rest of it, not very British. And I think the interesting thing about Gordon Brown, I mean, I say this as a Scot, I mean, that for all that there is this rumbling tendency going on about, oh, can a Scottish MP representing the Scottish MP constituency be a, British Prime Minister and all the rest? Actually, I think Brown is going to be much more low-key. I think you almost got a sense of that outside Number 10 Downing Street this afternoon. And I think the country will probably breathe a wee bit of a sigh of relief. Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, I mean, Una King, there's no doubt about it. For all the warm words about Tony Blair, the Labour Party collectively has been an accomplice. You know, it's a bit like Murder on the Orient Express. They all had an arm in the death of this Prime Minister one way or another. Why? What do they want? What does Labour want now?
Labour wants a fourth term in office. That's what Labour wants, and Labour recognises that 10 years is an amazing achievement, a decade. Politics has almost transformed. I mean, I was speaking to a political journalist this afternoon who said if someone had told him that on the last day or the last 24 hours you'd have Tony Blair speaking to Arnold Schwarzenegger about climate change, and then in PMQs, you would have Ian Paisley talking about securing and maintaining the rights, the human rights of Catholics. It is very surreal.
Those are all things Tony Blair did.
Absolutely,
Why
that's
get
my
rid of
point.
him, then?
That is my point, that he had an amazing impact on British politics. Because the fact is, we want a change. It is time for a change. I think people recognise that we want a different style. We got very tied up in issues around spin, problems with the media, problems with trust, problems with the perception that people had of the Labour Party. I mean, I'm speaking frankly and honestly to you, and the fact is that everyone, both inside and outside the Labour Party, actually knows that Gordon is the exact opposite of that, and we recognise that is going to be helpful. We also recognise that Tony was an amazing Prime Minister. I don't think the two are incompatible.
Gordon Brown's not a spin merchant. Do you accept that?
He's one of the best. I mean, and he matters to him. I mean, Gordon Brown. One thing I agree with you. Gordon Brown has one objective: to win an election in 2 or 3 years' time, and he is a very skillful presenter, media manager, very tough. It's a different product. Well, Blair, different, totally different. And about a month ago, some makeover artist obviously tried to persuade Gordon to start looking like Tony Blair and go around smiling and things. Well, he can't do that. I mean, Gordon cannot do the charismatic bit.
Well, to be frank, I think he's got facial damage to his face muscles.
Well, of course, one must be careful about that. But the fact is, he just is not at ease doing that.
Not a smiler.
He does not do charisma. He never will. But they are selling very, very carefully a different, low-key image. They're going to sell him as the solid, dependable,
do you think they've done the right thing, dumping Blair for Brown?
Well, they've tried for long enough. Yes, I think they have, and I think Blair should have really gone earlier than he did. He's been forced out inch by inch, bit by bit, and although they've rescued it, to be fair, for the last month or so, during this month and more we've had the handover, they were making the biggest pig's ear of what was supposed to be a smooth handover I've ever seen. The only good thing Blair's done staying on is to sort out this European summit, perhaps what he thought all along, but otherwise it's done great damage as these two people who hate each other have clung on waiting to hand over the baton.
But Ken, to be fair, how can you describe it as a pig's ear when he has done something that's utterly unprecedented? I mean, being able to manage that transition, that succession, the reason he's been able to do it is because he hasn't got 20 knives in his back, and that's not the experience that the last
He's got at least
Conservative
20, one which is Gordon's,
Prime
and the
Minister
others
had.
come from most of his friends.
I mean, Charles Kennedy, do you think Gordon Brown can turn over a sort of moral new leaf as far as the Labour government is concerned?
Yes, I think he can.
Do you think he is a more moral man than Tony Blair?
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, I really don't know about that. But the no, I think, you know, he's got a great opportunity. I mean, just look at Sky News. Just look at this programme. You know, here is Gordon Brown arriving with his wife at number 10 Downing Street. It's a new show in the new town and all the rest of it. Of course, that's a golden opportunity. And he's been waiting for this, as we all know, for an awful long time. He's had a lot of time to think about what he's going to do. And I would expect the unexpected. And that doesn't involve me, I hasten to add.
Yeah,
He will try to surprise. He always likes surprise.
Has he offered you a job, incidentally?
I've been sitting by the phone. I was complaining to Paddy Ashdown. I mean, Paddy gets a phone call, and I've been sitting there, and nothing's happened. No.
All sorts of rumours. Chris Patton's one of them.
All sorts of rumours, absolutely. And he's enjoying that. He's enjoying that.
Look, Adam.
He's had long enough to prepare his cabinet. Right. He's prepared endless cabinets over the last few years. Yes. He knows it's going to be, but it's the presentation. Right. Today's the handover. Tomorrow, a few big names. Get Patricia Hewitt out of the way tonight, so there's no sort of emotional moments when she goes. And then present with one or two surprises, and then some more the day after. Certainly, he'll hit the board running, and he will dominate the media for the next 10 days. I mean, Friday there'll be some statements on ministerial conduct, a new open government. You know, he's going to.
I do want to ask you about the parallels with 17 years ago. Tory party got rid of Margaret Thatcher in midstream. John Major came in, went on to win the next election.
You want to repeat that?
How worried should David Cameron be?
Oh, I don't think David should underestimate it. I always thought Gordon was very serious as a contender and a campaigner. He's going to be quite formidable to beat. I began to change my mind over the winter because the shambles of the changeover was damaging the reputation of Blair, Brown. The government's not been doing anything for a bit. But they have started to recover. He's going to be quite hard to beat.
Okay. How would you beat him at the dispatch box?
I think the Labour movement is beatable. Because of Iraq, because of the shambles in the health service.
How would you...
My advice to Cameron
We'll come back to today's proceedings in Parliament. We'll come to today's proceedings.
To beat him, you've got to make people want to vote Conservative. David Cameron's got to work on himself, his party, present himself to people as a better government.
It sounds a bit like the old adage, how do you win an election? You get more votes.
People forget it. They think all you do is attack the other chap.
But for now, in a moment, I'll be speaking to one of the rising stars who is indeed tipped for a promotion from Gordon Brown.
In the old days, if you fancied watching something half decent, you had to sit down when the newspaper told you. Then Sky Plus bowled into your life, and that all changed. Now you watched quality stuff whenever you felt like it. Fast forward to 2007 and you clocked this thing called Anytime on your TV guide. Get in, you chirp. See, Anytime brings you a tasty bunch of shows via Sky Plus and HD that you might just want to discover. Sky Anytime. Your Sky on demand.
The bigger the challenge, the more you need Duracell. Down go the ordinary zinc-carbon batteries. Up goes Duracell. When endurance matters, Duracell lasts longer, much longer. Jump up and get a free song on iTunes with every special pack of Duracell Ultra and Plus.
Patch has got me through it. Looking forward to this.
You ready, love?
I think so. 3, 2, 1.
Group support worked for me.
I got advice by post and email.
There are loads of ways the NHS can help you get rid of cigarettes. Give us a call on 0800 169 0169. Press red or visit gosmokefree.co.uk.
Well, of course, with the top job come the big decisions. Sky's correspondents have been looking at the challenges Gordon Brown must face. Now he's the new Prime Minister.
The new man has a difficult trick to perform: distance himself from the war on terror while still prosecuting it under a different name. He will fight it using the military, the intelligence services and economics. Because Gordon Brown is an Atlanticist, agreeing with Tony Blair that the UK must stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States. What he won't do is make jokes with US presidents about sharing the same toothpaste. Gordon Brown was part of the process which took us to war in Iraq, and it's unlikely he'll pull all the British troops out for several years. On Israel and Palestine, he's already used a new term, calling for a Middle East economic roadmap. So there'll be more money for more countries, more money for MI5 and MI6, and there'll be more of the same for the UK. The war on terror will continue. It just won't be called that anymore.
As far as the special relationship with Washington's concerned, the timing of Gordon Brown's succession could be better. This current president, languishing in his own polls, has little to offer a new international partner at this stage in his game. Certainly from a British point of view, hearty handshakes with George Bush hold no currency. The president's all-take and no-give history with Tony Blair makes any new association politically risky. Add to that next year's US election with its certainty of change, but uncertainty yet of result. Much more than his predecessor, Gordon Brown has an under-publicised affection for this country. He visits often and has lots of friends here. So expect him to keep his powder dry until they elect a new successor to the White House, someone to cultivate for a longer-term relationship with the greater possibility of reward.
Gordon Brown's biggest environmental challenge is going to be energy. He has to decide whether to push the nuclear button and start a new generation of nuclear power stations. Planning is going to be an issue, as it will be for renewable energies as well. But he's going to have to get going on them if he's to meet the government's targets. Then he'll have to work on driving changes in our green behaviour. Do you tax us out of our bad habits or try to coax us out of them? Air passenger duty, road pricing, bin taxes, all controversial. Then there are the negotiations to reach a global Green Deal. With the Kyoto Protocol about to expire, but a change of heart in the White House, Gordon Brown has a chance to shape the diplomacy. But you'll have to get Britain's house in order. Carbon dioxide emission levels are rising here.
Whatever Gordon Brown's hopes and ambitions as Prime Minister, the first few months are almost certain to be dominated by what happens here. The future of Europe is one of those issues that every Prime Minister must just hope would disappear. And for Gordon Brown, it promises to be a rough ride. There is a feeling that France and Germany, with dynamic new leaders in Sarkozy and Merkel, are trying to drive Europe forward. And they're waiting to see what kind of leader Mr. Brown will be. The impression is that he's slightly suspicious of Europe, certainly from his time as Chancellor, and a real contrast to Mr. Blair and his love for everything European. He knows that too much enthusiasm for what goes on here risks turning public opinion at home, and the Conservatives know that as well. And there's always the looming shadow of the R word, a referendum, and that's enough to send a chill down his spine.
Well, believe it or not, some of the politics over the next few years, the general election, will actually be based on policy. Ulrike, what do you think are the real policy priorities, the things that Gordon Brown needs to deal with immediately?
Well, obviously he's going to have big issues that are coming up, whether it's the EU constitution, whether it's Trident, whether it's what he does with Iraq. But I think what he's going to want to be concentrating on are actually some of the domestic issues around health, education, affordable housing, and the real thing that's more important to him than any of the specifics, although he has to deliver on them, the real thing that's important to him is to actually change the way we do politics. So he's talking, for example, very much about having citizens' juries. He's talking about changing the compact, if you like, between politicians and the electorate. Now, that's been said before on occasion by politicians, and his biggest challenge in my view is actually being able to deliver that. I believe he can, but that's my view. I support him fully, but that is the biggest challenge, and if he fails in that, then there will be a problem. I think he'll succeed, which is why I think he will win the next election.
No mention of the economy in that. Are those the real challenges waiting to jump on him?
Well, there are all kinds of areas needing policy. There is no policy going well. The only thing going wrong correctly for the government at the moment is the economy still is not in trouble. Otherwise, there's really no field which has been going well for Blair for quite some time. We've never had a Prime Minister in modern times who's come to office with nobody knowing anything about what he actually intends to do on most subjects. We never will again. It's just a freak effect of the way he's held one office for 10 years and not had to impart his views on things to his colleagues, let alone to the general public. So we're all guessing at what he'll do. The key thing he's been saying all day, which will be his political tactic, and he's an intensely political man. He will be focused on the election. The political thing is it's a new government. It's change. It's not Blair. Forget that. You've got rid of that. He took us into Iraq. He got the health service into a mess. This is a new, different government. And he might try some of the things that we said, the style things, he's a good spin man, people's juries, all this.
Yeah,
but if he tries to be too open and democratic,
no, but if you'll
hate it.
If you're right, and health, education, foreign policy is all going badly, these will probably bite him before he gets to a general election.
Yes, I mean, Iraq, we're already actually in the process, without declaring it, withdrawing our troops from Iraq, I think. Most of them will be out by the end of this year. The Americans don't like that, but they realise it's going to happen. What he has to sort out is what on earth are we doing in Afghanistan? That's where the troops and the kit are going to go. I would like to see us making progress in Afghanistan. You need a policy in Afghanistan. What are we trying to do, apart from just fighting a lot of people in bitter battles in a very difficult province? And he may have worked that out, but I don't know what his views are. On the health service, he'll start with the health service. If he asks himself what is making the Labour movement bleed at the moment, after Iraq, what's making it bleed is the crisis in the health service. And unlike journalists who have to guess and report each other as to what they think he will do in the health service, I haven't the first clue what Gordon Brown will do on the health service, nor does anybody else. He won't halt reform. I think he'll be a reformer. It's not true he's old Labour and left. He will try and get reform to work. But how he'll do it, I don't know.
Where do you see the policy pitfalls?
Well, first of all, just on that last point that Ken is making, I strongly suspect that where the health service is concerned, that Gordon Brown is going to be a bit of a Ken Clarke.
He will be a reformer, you mean?
Yes, and
successful.
I think he's going to pursue some of the policies that.
But he does, doesn't he? I mean, he does have this policy
quite vigorously
about what
10, 15 years
what
ago.
the trade unions calling privatisation, the involvement of the private sector, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. And I mean, this is a guy who's, he's fully signed up for the PFI. Now, the PFI cheque is not going to come in until probably, we're all retiral age, if not beyond. And, I just don't see that it's a very sensible policy myself. But, however, it's the one that he's pursued. But I think that one of the interesting things over the next few months is going to be if you take energy policy. Now, Blair, laid it on the line and he said, well, I think, by and large, we're going to have more civil nuclear power as meeting our energy needs. And that's quite controversial, and now we're not quite sure where the approach is leading and all that. At the same time, pension policy, there was actually a rather sensible approach by the government. Take in a Dare Turner, get the three parties involved, get a degree of consensus. Now, which way is Brown going to veer in his direction as Prime Minister? I think he will go more the pension approach than he will the civil nuclear
all those
power
areas
approach.
he faces potential early internal opposition within Labour, doesn't he? I mean,
depending how he plays it, that's the point.
I mean, he certainly does. He will face that internal opposition, although I think the left in the party has recognised they weren't able to muster enough support to mount a challenge, because there isn't actually the appetite in the party to support the left, the far left, certainly, in the party. And what they recognise is that Gordon Brown is able to actually deliver in terms of poverty reduction, and that's the party's agenda.
I mean, rather
reduction.
to the surprise of everybody, he has said constitutional reform will be one of his priorities, but no one knows what he means by that. You've been with him for the last 6 weeks. Do you know what he means?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that he means, actually, is about changing the relationship between the executive and the legislature. I think that's very important. He's going to try and ensure that we have power flowing back to Parliament. He's much more of a parliamentary man. He wants to finish and tie up and, you know, complete the Lords reform. And I imagine at some point, that might be after an election, he will be looking for elected and, you know, to force through those changes so we have an elected
You've just been working on this. Do you know what...
I hope he can do all those things. I voted with him on Lords reform. I found myself talking to him, walking through the division, voting for 80% elected Lords. So I asked him, now, when you get in, you know, are you going to see this through? We agree, you know, sort of, but it's all down to you, actually. Nobody's bothered what Blair's doing, apart from allowing this vote. You will have to take this through with a guillotine. You will have to use the Parliament Act to get over the Lords. He wouldn't tell me. Now, I didn't think he would. But I don't think he's told Una, and I don't think he's told anybody. So I hope Una's right.
All right.
Because it's going to be a big test in the autumn. If he's a real constitutional reformer, well, is he going to do what he's already made clear he believes in on the House of Lords?
Ken, what he has said on the record is that he sees the future of all politics as elected. That includes the House of Lords.
Well, will he do it if it
That
gets
doesn't mean
controversial?
We shall have to see. We're going to be
I'll
back.
believe it when I see it.
You're going to be joining me again at the end of the programme talking about what happened in the House of Commons today. But before then, who's going to be in Gordon Brown's cabinet? I'll be joined by one person who's been tipped widely.
Who will you be? What will you do? Without that cigarette in your hand, you'll never know until you quit. Lose the smoke. Keep the fire. With Nicotinell, a gum as satisfying as the rest of your smoke-free life. Lose the smoke. Keep the fire. Nicotinell gum in 4 crisp-coated flavors.
At Onken, we believe you can live life half empty, half full, or if you like, full to the brim. Enjoy life the Onken way.
19 leaders in one place at one time. At Leaders in London Summit, hear and meet Kofi Annan, Stephen Covey, Al Gore, Michael Eisner, Edward de Bono, Professor Michael Porter, Martin Sorrell and Karen Brady. Leaders in London Summit, November the 26th until November the 20th.